So this is episode 1 of a podcast that I want to do. My name is Joe Hollis, and I'm speaking to you from Mountain Gardens. Some, at least, of you will be familiar with me because of my website, Mountain Gardens, or my YouTube videos. I don't know how the rest of you are going to end up here, but yeah, so I was hoping that I was going to write a book about the experiment I've been doing with my life, which I call Making a Paradise Garden. But that seems unlikely to happen, partly due to a disastrous fire which destroyed my library and whatnot. So anyway, I'm going to step back and just try and express some ideas as a podcast, which is easier than writing, for sure. So I've been doing this project for 50 years, and basically I just want to make a report. This was very much self-conceived as an experiment in how to live on Earth. And I put a lot of time and energy into it, and I just want to tell you what I did and how it's come out so far. So the whole idea of life as an experiment, we all compose our lives of other lives that we've witnessed. Every life is an experiment in how to do the best we can given our situation, time, place, cultural milieu, whatever, and we're constantly broadcasting our lives, and other people see, especially little kids, like, that person is so cheerful all the time. I want to be like him when I grow up. Or that person is just busy all the time. They're just always doing something. You just never see them sitting around. I want to be like that when I grow up. Or that person is just surrounded by all this beautiful stuff all the time. Their clothes and their house and everything. I want to be like that. We see little fragments from this life and that life, and we compose the life we want to have. Or like, how about this? That person, I always feel so calm and collected when I'm around that person. I would like to be like that. Wouldn't that be great? If, like, most of us had that for a goal. Anyway, so my life is very definitely an experiment. I don't know, I'm sure I'm not the only one, but I think there's probably a relative minority of people who actually conceive of their lives as an experiment, and more to the point, as like one single experiment. Like, I'm going to do this experiment. That's going to be my life on this planet, this lifetime, is to just try out this theory, because we're lost. We need to be sending out scouts in every direction, right? So I'm a scout. I've been out there for 50 years exploring a certain direction to how we might live on Earth without screwing everything up. Or you might say, how to be a good human being. What would that mean? So that's your life as an experiment, and I particularly think of it as like a single experiment. It's not like a whole series of different experiments. And so it's like, in a way, you could think of it like there's this bit in The Hobbit at the end where the dragon is terrorizing this town. And this one guy finds out, I think a little birdie tells him or something, that this dragon actually has one vulnerable spot. And so this mighty archer takes aim, and bingo, the force is with him, and he hits it right in that particular spot. So I say you can think of your life as like a single shot, right? And you're just going to take aim at the problem. And your life's going to be like this arrow. You're going to just try and hit the target. Anyway, that's one way to think about it. If you want to, like, I don't know, feel heroic or something. Uh, Serial life is an experiment. So I want to give you a report about this particular experiment I did. And I do have a sort of a target audience, but I mean, this is just out there for whoever wants it, as is everything of mine. I like my whole website and my YouTube videos. It's like all there, free. There's no copyrights on anything. Help yourself. It's always nice to get a little credit. If whatever. But I do have this sort of target audience, which is young people who want to devote their lives to the environment, the ecological situation, the future of Gaia. They just want to be protectors of the planet. They just feel like that's the most important thing to do, and I agree. But then so you get this noble goal. Then the question is, well, what exactly are you going to do? I mean, you could become a lawyer. You could become an environmental lawyer. You could run for Congress, although I suspect you would sell your soul before you ever got to the point of being able to do any good in that direction. You could make tons of money. That's a new thing that the animal rights people are putting out. You should just go out there and make as much money as possible and donate it to good causes. Well, so there's various ideas about what you might do, and I gave it a lot of thought when I was first getting started. When I was in my late 20s, I bought my land when I was 30 years old in 1972. So last year was my 50th anniversary. And leading up to getting this land, and then after I got it, I put a lot of time into thinking exactly what to do. There's a lot of possibilities. You got a piece of land, it's like tabula rasa. Not really, actually. There's a ton of stuff there, but I mean, there's all kind of things you could do with it. At one time, I had this fantasy of when I bought my land, it had never been farmed. It was just woods. It had been logged a few times, but it was still just woods because it was too steep and too rocky for anybody to attempt to actually do anything with it. I had this fantasy at one point where I was just going to cut out this little opening in the center and do this super formal garden like Versailles, with the patterns except I, of course, be using beets and carrots and things, and creating this. It would have been fun, but that's kind of trivial. So, as I say, I put a lot of thought into thinking about what I'm going to do. Really, and time is running out. Let me just say that. We've all been alive on this planet since the first spark of life on this planet. So if instead of thinking of yourself as this person with ears and a brain who is listening to me talking, you think that that creature is just the husk for this particular lifetime of what's been alive since the beginning of life, which is your genes. So everything that's alive on this planet at this moment is the same age. We all started life. At least that's what science claims. Life never started twice. It only started once. Everything is connected. If you get back to the last common ancestor, which I guess is some kind of little bacteria or something, at the very beginning, but it all radiates out from there. Just like this body you're sitting in, or that I'm sitting in, with all this internal complexity and everything, all started from one little spark, right? One little fertilized egg. Some corpuscle running around my blood system might be just thinking it's touring the world and it's seeing all these amazing sights. It's going into my lungs and there's this huge cavern and oh, the scenery must be fantastic. Uh, it might, well, we could think that maybe that corpuscle just hasn't got a clue uh, that it's part of the whole thing, that the whole thing is one thing. Although I rather suspect that every living creature on Earth is enlightened except modern man or human. Uh, I think the rest of them all know. All the animals, all the plants, they all know that it's all just one big living thing that they're a part of. We're the only ones that have managed to forget that. Anyway, I think I went down a little corner there. Now I got to get back to where I was, which was talking about if you running out of time. Yeah, so think of all the stuff that's become extinct, like whole families, whole phyla. Like, where are the trilobites? Where are the ammonites that ruled the seas? Where are the dinosaurs? All gone, all gone. But we survived. Every kind of exigency, comet collision, 20 years of winter, whatever. Somehow our genes made it through. And the genes of everything else that's out there, really, which is a very nice thought. That everything out there, we're really old friends. We've been through it all together, Plants were evolving in their plant-like way, and the animals evolving in our animal-like way, and like just companions, right? But anyway, but it looks like it's running out. It looks like we might be getting towards the end of the line, with our genes. The whole thing might just sputter out. Kind of looking like that. So it's nice to say, well, in this lifetime, I'm just going to do this, because I'm going to have all these other lifetimes. And maybe this time I'll just see how famous I can get, or how wealthy I can get, or let's just explore what it's like to be a millionaire or a billionaire. But we're just running out of time to run too many more experiments, maybe. So we should really make it a good one, Make it your last shot, as they say, or imagine that it might be your last shot. So, in other words, let's give a lot of thought to what kind of experiment we're going to do. So, and I do have an analysis on that, which I came up with at some point in a blinding flash of inspiration, where I realized the extent to which civilization and the natural world resemble each other in terms of their hierarchical structure. So we got what we call the trophic pyramid. You've all seen a picture of it. There's a big bunch of plants on the bottom, and then there's a smaller band of herbivores on top, and then there's carnivores and second level carnivore, whatever, and the pyramid gets smaller and smaller until you get up to this, what we call keystone species, which are generally ecologically very important, because going up is the provision of food. Everything eats from the level below it. But there's a return, and the return is the control function. That the things on top keep everything organized down below. If anything gets too out of hand, they divert resources to getting back into line, so to speak. And then you just look at the way society has organized itself, and it's pretty much exactly the same thing, of course. Big bunch of peasants on the bottom, and then you've got different levels of managers on top, and then you've got kind of the owners, the executive up on the top, and leading all the way up to, at certain points in the past, a king, or, one person, or oligarchy, or whatever, who is benefiting from all the wealth coming up from below, and they're exerting this control function to make sure it keeps coming up to them from below. So then when I realized that is the extent to which, so I divide, I've got this big dichotomy that I work with. It's quite simplistic. On the one side, you've got the primitive, what I would call primitive, which is Gaia. So primitive is people who live as part of Gaia. And then on the other side of the dichotomy, you've got civilization. And civilization is one of these kind of goody-goody words that just means everything good about culture, Beethoven and Michelangelo and I don't know what all, high culture. That's civilization, literature, Shakespeare, whoever, Milton. So that's civilization, and it's an unqualified good, right? It just represents our highest aspirations as human beings, etc., etc. But that's not how I'm using the word civilization. So civilization derives from civitas, and it means the state. So this is the tendency of human beings to organize themselves into this hierarchical structure. So that's the obverse of primitive, and that, or you could call it the state, you could call it the economy. There's all different words. Just the whole mass of humans above the level of people just living as part of Gaia. And then the thing about that is that civilization is actually a cancerous condition within Gaia. So it's like one species that's just multiplying out of control because it denies that it's part of the whole. So it's just operating on its own without any of the constraints of being part of the whole. Which, of course, though, that kind of freedom gives us immense power to just do all kinds of outrageous stuff, like cut down all the trees in Ireland just to suppress some peasant revolts or something, or invent trawlers that can drop down a big net and just snap up a whole school of fish half a mile down at the bottom of the ocean by radar or whatever, on and on and on. All the stuff we are managing to do. So I see that as a cancerous condition within Gaia. And furthermore, there's another analogy I make is that animals eat plants or other animals, and we convert and we extract from them energy, which we convert into blood, and blood circulates all around our body, and it enables us to do work, it enables us to reproduce, and so on. And then what we don't use, what we did not make into blood, we excrete, and that becomes fertilizer for the environment, for other creatures in parts of the environment. And on the other hand, capital eats the world, eats all of Gaia, whatever, rocks, oil, water, running water, clean water, you can make money off of that. Trees, of course, just whatever can be turned into money. So capital eats the world and turns it into money. It extracts value from it. And that money circulates within this hierarchy of civilization, and it enables it to grow and reproduce itself and accomplish work. And then it excretes out pollution, and it ain't fertilizer. It's just plain old pollution. Stuff that never breaks down. Plastics and so on that are just with us forever as a toxin in the environment. And that's pretty much the definition of what a cancer is, I believe. It's just a particular cell or organelle in our bodies that's just multiplying out of control because it's totally detached and it's poisoning us with its waste. That is what's going on, and that is the belly of the beast that we've all been born into. But so if you want to make your life into one experiment, why don't you just try and get out of that, right? So that's what I've been trying to do, is figure out how to get out of that. So it's a matter of going after the basic root cause of the problem. So if the problem is that humans, a certain fragment, I mean, it's really only comparatively recently, less than 1,000 years, that this Western materialistic capital, whatever, has taken over the whole planet practically. So what we want to do is look for the root cause. So that's like a principle in Chinese medicine. You don't treat the symptoms, you treat the cause. You don't want to spend your life addressing just a symptom, which is possibly transient. We want to go after what's the cause, root cause of the whole thing. If we're just going to take one shot, our last best shot, we want to shoot at the heart of it. So what is that? I would submit that that is our value system. If we could change the value system, everything could change very, very, very fast. What's happening is the value system is changing all right, but it's changing in the wrong direction. So we have the value system associated with civilization, which is, as I said, there's the trophic pyramid of civilization with all the peasants on the bottom. Actually, the garbage men are on the very bottom, like the recyclers in the trophic pyramid, the worms and fungi. Anyway, so you got your peasants, and then you've got your managers at various levels, from a shop foreman on up the line, and then you got the people that are actually making the decisions, the executives. And so in civilization, what we of course want to do is get as high on that pyramid as we can. So culture is communication, right? That's what culture is. It's like us talking to each other. And in particular with our material possessions, what the clothes you wear, the car you drive, the neighborhood you live in, the places you go on vacation, what you do for entertainment, what kind of food you're eating. That's all making statements about who you are. Even I would submit about the food you eat, because the food you eat is the kind of food that you think a person of the status which you aspire to should be eating. So, of course, it tastes better to you. So that's how we eat the world, is like trying to proclaim our status in that pyramid. Whereas, in fact, we were all born to be keystone species in Gaia. Like the human species as a whole was right at the top of the pyramid. And instead, only a few of us get to be on top of a pyramid. The rest of us are all underlings. And there's so much more to say about all this. For instance, there's the aspect of our needs. So within civilization, what you do is sell yourself, basically. I mean, there's a tiny minority of people, maybe a pretty good percentage of those people are the ones listening to this, but we'd have to acknowledge that there's a pretty tiny minority of people that are actually doing what they want to do most of the time. Most of the time we're working, and we don't really necessarily enjoy our jobs. So work, I define work as whatever you're doing when you'd rather be doing something else. Uh, so by that criteria, probably no animals work. They're just doing what they want to do, which is look for food most of the time, or sleep and have interesting dreams, or possibly just wander around enjoying the scenery. We don't really know about that. Exploring, you might say. Creatures just explore their environment. Anyway, there's so many directions it just needs to go in. But basically, we sell ourselves off. So a complete human being has all these aspects, right? Spiritual, emotional, physical, whatever. But instead, we're just going to decide to use the best 50 years of our lives, the best 40 hours of the weeks of those years of our lives in exchange for money. And then we take money and we fulfill all of our various needs. For physical needs, for food, and needs for entertainment, and needs for inspiration, and needs for pleasure, whatever, all the different needs. We pretty much fulfill them with the money that we got by essentially ignoring our needs for all those other hours of all those other weeks. But then if you look at the Gaian side of the balance sheet, so animals and presumably people, to the extent that there are any left, who still cling to the value system of Gaia, you might say, the ones that never really gave up the faith, and to maintain their connection to Gaia, they've just had to retreat, because they keep getting pushed out of the way by civilization, which is by its nature expansive. Into the Australian outback, the Kalahari Desert, the depths of the rainforest, just retreat, so that you can still live as part of Gaia. These people, there are very few instances of primitive people voluntarily embracing civilization. There are way, way, way more instances of civilized people coming into contact with primitive people and just joining up, whether it was American Indians or whoever. Civilization begins in conquest and continues in repression. That's the great opening line of, what's his name's book, In Search of the Primitive, Stanley Diamond. Terrific reference. So in the primitive situation, you just go out there every day, explore your environment, as we said. You get to know all the plants that are out there and possibly the animals that are out there. And you gather what food you need and medicine if you need to heal some health problem. And at the same time, you're getting a great deal of exercise and you're being in a beautiful environment. You're getting all this positive aesthetic feedback, which possibly extends, a lot of people would say, definitely extends to spiritual inspiration, even to the level of mysticism, the feeling of all as one. So all of these various needs are being met at the same time. And of course, you're probably part of a group of people working together. So you're having your social needs as well, and you're probably having conversations and whatever. That would be the civilized side of it, where all the needs are integrated instead of fragmented as they are within civilization, where you have to go to all these different places with your money in your hand to get this need or that need satisfied. So, where are we at? And how long have we been at it? I don't know. So, yeah, so that's quite a bit as far as coming up with a game plan. So this was going to be my experiment in life. Let's just strike at this. So the conclusion is obvious. but I might as well go ahead and state it, is that we need to make the transition from civilization back to living as part of Gaia. So that's a pretty huge challenge. And we need for lots and lots of people to be trying it, because there's going to be a lot of experiments that need to be done in that regard. Just based on your kind of approach to things, and where you live, what conditions, what the climate is, what the soil is, all these things. So let me step back a little more and say how I conceived of this experiment. So one way was the idea of the Paradise Garden. The Paradise Garden is a botanical garden of useful plants grown ecologically and arranged ornamentally. So I can talk about that for quite a while, but I don't want to get too deep into that right this minute. But grown ecologically means you're trying to establish as many different plants as you can that don't need a lot of care. Like, you just want to put them in the right situation, which might involve creating specific habitats that you might not have on the land you're working with. There might not be any wetlands, but you could make a wetland, maybe. That's what I've been doing. But anyway, I think I just jumped a little bit ahead of myself there on that, about making this Paradise Garden. There was something else I needed to say. Oh, about human needs in general. All right, so we have a little gap there, and I think perhaps we need to actually back up a little bit. We'll do some editing here, I hope, or I'll just do the whole thing over again. But I was really talking about values, and then I got distracted off to the side. But so if we really want to strike at the heart of this thing that's eating the planet, which is what do you call it? Which is civilization. So what's going on is a sort of a battle of superorganisms. So Gaia is a superorganism of which we are all a component. All living creatures on Earth are components of superorganism Gaia. So civilization is an upstart superorganism. And as I said, it's designed, it mimics superorganism Gaia, but it feeds on Gaia. It's not independent. Gaia is its own self. It's Ziran, spontaneously generated. Ziran would be the Chinese phrase that's most often used to translate the word nature. And what it really means is coming into being all by itself. Self-generated. That's Ziran. That's Gaia. Civilization is a parasite, a cancer, more accurately, that derives within Gaia. So, but the value system associated with civilization is taking over the planet like a wildfire. You know, it was people have always felt a little bit embarrassed about luxury up until recently, but now it's just considered unequivocal good to have as much money as you can, have as much wealth flaunted. So that is the value system associated with civilization, and it has to do, as I said, with placing yourself as high on that pyramid as you can. So what we really want to do is try, if we want to, I mean, it seems like a hopeless goal, but it's something to do with your life, and it's really the most interesting possible thing to do with your life. So let's do it, which is to try and make this voyage back from civilization back to where we came from, which is in the bosom of Gaia. So what's the problem with so so how do we get so that might be our value system, yours and mine, but how do we get the great mass of people to come around to that idea? Well, in a way, it's like so much of modern life, which is you're trying to go downstairs, which is easy, right? To go downstairs, except there's a million people trying to get upstairs at the same time. So it's becoming very, very difficult to just walk downstairs because you'll get trampled by all the people running upstairs. So, I mean, there's so many ways in which living as part of Gaia is superior. It's just almost self-evident. Take this just for one example. Well, there's this whole stuff about a paleo diet being more healthy, right? And uh, this whole idea of forest farming, which is now being prescribed medically in the Far East for people suffering from drastic overwork. They've got a word in Japanese for falling dead at your desk. So they send these people out to the forest to walk around, and now there's lots of brain research, and you can put a thing on your head, and it'll measure all your brain waves while you walk down a busy urban downtown street, and then you can put that same hat on your head and walk down a piece of beautiful woodland trail next to a little flowing creek and so on, inhaling deeply the aromas of all the trees around you and so on, and there's a huge drastic change in your brainwaves for the better. Needless to say, your blood pressure goes down just for starters. So there's just massive amounts of information about how much better for us it would be to live in the way that I am suggesting we should live. But instead, if I start really talking about how I live, the first thing you're going to start, well, not you, but many people will think is that they're going to have to give something up. Ooh, how terrifying. You mean give up my TV? You mean give up each of us having a car? You mean give up, I don't know, give up. So trade-offs, it's not giving up, it's trading off, right? Let's get rid of this give up idea. But how are we going to get people to see the importance of this trade-off? Because it's, well, it involves changing everything in your life. Changing your values. That's what I'm saying. The values are at the heart of everything, right? Which is exactly why that's where we need to put our efforts into. So how could we possibly get people to change their values? Well, only one way that I can think of. Writing a book isn't going to do much good. There's been plenty of books advocating for this stuff already. What's needed is examples. It's as simple as that. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, then a life example is worth 1,000 pictures, or more than that. Lots more than that. So there's some positive reinforcement about what we need to be doing. We need to be demonstrating the superiority of these values. We're just demonstrating what life looks like lived according to these values, and let people decide for themselves on what's superior and what's not superior. I mean, we're not going around telling people what to do, God knows. Be a total waste of time. So then to get back on track about how I have conceived of this program. So one thing was the Paradise Garden, which I was about to define, but before that, let me just talk about my tripod. So all these ancient Greek philosopher people have their tripod being very stable, right? 3 legs, it can't tip over. etc. I don't know, matter, form, and spirit, or whatever the hell they call them. My tripod, I have a tripod too, of what we're trying to accomplish. So we want to, as citizens, I mean, the whole question in a way is, how do you be a good human being? What would it mean to be a good human being on this planet at this point in time? So I make a tripod out of that. And the first leg is that we are benefiting, or at the very least not being detrimental to Gaia. So what does that mean? So what does it seem that Gaia is wanting to do? And of course, scientists would be offended by that question. Totally offended by that question. But it doesn't matter, I'm not a scientist. And I think that's a really perfectly logical question to ask. So I'm a Taoist, just to put it aside. There'll be a lot more about Taoism as things go along, but the idea of Taoism is that the whole world, Earth and beyond the Earth, everything, right up to being and non-being, the whole ball of wax is the Tao, and it's just the way. That's just the way it is. And it all has its internal coherence, even if it sometimes might seem random to us. It's all the Tao. And the objective of what a good human being is to a Taoist is a person who fits themselves into the Tao. And the metaphor they use is being able to fly. So you're just like flying. You're just so in tune with the Tao, with everything that's happening, that so your life becomes totally effortless. And it's like flying through the air. That would be their analogy. So fitting in. So we want to fit ourselves into what Gaia is trying to do and be, right? So that we can further, as part of Gaia, we of course want our primary interest is the health of Gaia. Just like the primary interest of any part of my body is the health of the whole thing. You know, the tip of my little finger. Or as Hippocrates says, you can't cure the finger without curing the hand. You can't cure the hand without curing the arm. And eventually you have to cure the whole body, no matter what the problem is. So we want to cure whatever this threat is to Gaia that we perceive. So yeah, what does Gaia want to do? You know, it's interesting question, which seems to be rarely asked. But what I've concluded is that Gaia wants to become ever more fertile and diverse, which is kind of the same thing, really. It's just the diversity is on the top and the fertility is on the bottom, right? And they're each an aspect of the same thing. So that's what Gaia seems to be doing, is just ever increasing diversity and fabulous new creatures that we can't even imagine. That exceeds our imagination. There was that stupid movie a little while back called Avatar, where he tried to create like some kind of beautiful alternative world. And it totally failed. They couldn't think of anything new at all. It was just like, let's put curlicues on everything and make them a little bit more fluorescent colored. And that's the best we can do about imagining this wonderful, some kind of wonderful world. But that's where it's at, and in fact, it gets into this idea of beauty, which I want to talk about more later, but I don't want to get distracted right now. But I think that the world has a tendency to be more beautiful. And what's that? What's beautiful? That's just like what humans like, right? Well, maybe not. Maybe Maybe every living creature has an idea of what's beautiful, and it's the same idea that Gaia has of what's beautiful, and maybe that's something that unites us all, is what we call beautiful, like, which is really, I mean, it's kind of an inadequate word for a total sense of immersion in an optimum environment. Anyway, I'll talk about that more at some point in the future. But just for the purposes of getting started here, and my tripod, so as far as the leg goes, which applies to Gaia, I would say, and it's not that different from Aldo Leopold, land ethic. A thing is good when it tends to promote, I forget how he words it, promotes the goodness of the whole thing, or something like that. So the same idea. What's good is to promote, and I'm just calling it diversity, but that's just one aspect of it. All right, then, moving right along. Leg number 2 would be our species, human beings. So we have some loyalty to our species. We want our species to prosper. We are all very distressed about the extent to which few of us are grinding a lot of us under their feet. So certainly whatever life we create for ourselves, we want to address that problem. And the way I would suggest we address that is to live on no more than our appropriate share of resources of the earth. And the most obvious one to start with would be land. And I did, years ago, I looked up to see how much land there would be per person on Earth. But of course, it's a super complicated problem because some land is worth a lot more than other land in terms of how many people it can support, right? I mean, you're not going to say that an acre of land on Baffin Island is going to be the equivalent to an acre of land in Costa Rica. That's absurd. Be a wildly different proportion. So we can't really figure that out. I mean, you could try. At the time I did it, it was not impossible. Population keeps increasing, but it was not impossible. It was something like you got an acre of arable land and another acre and a half or 2 acres of sort of borderline, not really arable, but sort of pasture or forest or something. I don't know what the number would be now, but the whole idea would be, the goal would be to live on a very small amount of land. That would be the interesting experiment, especially when there's lots of people running around saying we can't possibly feed everybody on Earth without genetic engineering and without, like, basically artificializing what's still left that's not artificial at this point in time, and building big towers in cities with reflectors to collect sunlight, God knows what all. Insane expenditures of capital. But the idea would be minimizing your land. So I have about 2.8 acres. I think I've now got it up to about 5 acres. I would like to evolve Mountain Gardens after me into a community of about 8 people. Considering that all of my land would have been considered not usable on land use maps, my land would not even qualify as anything that could be used for anything, really, except cutting down all the trees every 50 years or so. Too rocky, too steep, etc. So that's an experiment. That's a really interesting experiment. Like, I'd like to have 8 people live here, and I think the land could support them. Of course, we'd be drawing in resources from without. We'd be having a school at the end of the road where we could teach people about permaculture and native ecology and medicinal herbs and so on. But But still, I think that we could, or could come close to, growing all of our own food on this tiny scrap of land. If we really got serious about it, using permacultural techniques combined with French intensive and so on. I just think that's a really, really interesting experiment to do, is see how what you can do on the smallest amount of land. And then, of course, the other big resource is money. So we bring different amounts of money to our... My idea of what's this experiment I'm doing with my life is that I wanted it to be relevant to as many people as possible, including the tribal peoples that I lived with in the middle of Borneo for 3 years when I was in the Peace Corps. I want what I'm doing with my life to be relevant to those people. And anybody. And so that has a lot to do with what resources you bring to the table. If you're starting off to do something like this with $100,000 in the bank, then the things that you do are probably mostly going to be relevant to other people who have $100,000 in the bank. So as far as being relevant goes, the less resources. And so for this very reason, I've never applied for any grants. Because, I could put up a hoop house or a tunnel, whatever. That's what everybody does with their grant. Just put up a tunnel. I could do that. For one thing, they're ugly. I don't really want a tunnel on my land. But for another, then people would just say, oh, well, he just managed to do that because he got a grant, right? So... and that's a limited thing, so that's not relevant to me. That's just something that came from a grant. So the whole idea was to just see what could be done with a minimum of outside capital. So for many, many years, my income was less than $5,000 a year, I think. But that was in the good old days, before much inflation, and that was back when if you stayed home, you couldn't spend any money. So all you had to do is stay home and work on your garden, and you would never be spending any money. Well, of course, they fixed that now. Now, probably most people spend money while they're at home. So that particular strategy doesn't necessarily work, but the concept works of trying to be as relevant to as many people as possible by tapping into as little resources as you can outside, particularly in the form of money. So the whole idea was to just let's see what we can do off of this piece of land. It's got trees on it that I can build with. It's got clay. That's a good building material. It had lots and lots of rocks, like really nice rocks that were flat on both sides, a tremendous resource. And then it had all this plant life, plant diversity, all kinds of medicinal herbs, edible things, really, unfortunately, didn't, if I was starting all over again, knowing now what I know then, I probably would have done things quite differently. I probably would have kept everything the way it was to a greater extent, although I wanted to grow as many different plants as I could. And so I really needed a clearing, because half the plants on Earth don't grow in the woods. But anyway, that's getting more over into the Paradise Garden thing, which I want to talk about presently. But so that would be item number 2. Like, what can we do to improve the situation on Earth of people, which is so manifestly unjust? Equal rights and justice, says, who was it said that? Can't remember. It's a great song. I don't want no peace. I want equal rights and justice. So if you want to be part of that, you're going to just have to use a lot less resources and convert your needs. So the whole idea is to start satisfying our needs directly from nature, right? That's the whole journey that we're on, from civilization to Gaia. is transferring our needs one by one. Our needs are like this huge octopus stuck out there to, as I said, in civilization, we're stuck to, I don't know, the bank, the grocery store, the doctor's office, the theater, the church even. And we just got to peel those off like octopus legs and stick them over here on the other side to Gaia. Just keep transferring these needs. So, yeah. So that's what's going on there. That's leg 2 of my tripod. And then leg 3 is the individual, personal, me. None of this is going to work unless it's making me happy. There's a certain amount of martyrs out there. There's a certain amount of people that are quite willing to make themselves be unhappy if they think it's helping to save the earth. But that's not a good example, because not very many people are willing to be unhappy. You're not really setting a good example. However noble your actions may be, you're not really making a good example for other people. Because they're saying, yeah, he's living this super duper ecological life, and he's recycling everything in the world and whatever, but he seems pretty miserable. So we want to be happy. Happy and healthy. That would be the watchwords for this third leg of the tripod. We want a lifestyle that is good for the planet, that is good for our species, and that is good for us individually. We want to be healthier and happier. So I alluded to a couple of these things earlier. The possibility of a superior diet, growing our own food, getting in touch with the seasonality of food, with the whole life cycle of what foods are available at different times of year. And of course, it's all being naturally grown. Even if it's in the garden, it's still organically grown, but even more preferably, it's just wild stuff out there that we're collecting. Same with medicine, of course. Medicinal herbs, to whatever extent we need them, and especially adaptogens, the herbs that promote health so that we don't get sick, that we should certainly be adding to our diet. But then the other things I mentioned, like I think I mentioned it, this forest bathing idea, that it's so much more good for our psyche, our psychological condition, our brain waves, whatever, blood pressure, all this stuff benefits so much by being in a natural environment. So that is a good aspect. And then there's the whole spiritual aspect, the whole kind of uplifting, the whole thing of these Taoist priests going into the mountains just to meditate on the landscape. And those are some ideas that I hope to get into later on as Chinese ideas of the landscape and the effects that the landscape can have on our psyches at kind of the deepest level of kind of uplifting us. So it's sort of like the mystical experience, the experience of all is one. Like, to what extent can landscape assist us to reach that kind of a point, which most people would call a peak experience. So there's plenty of reasons why. So that would be the tripod. So that would be, then you just drop a plumb bob from the middle of your tripod, and X marks the spot, and that's your paradise garden. From that perspective, that would be a definition of paradise, or really paradise gardening. So it's two different. So it's the same word, paradise, but paradise is a place, you might say, a habitat. Paradise gardening is a niche, and the niche that Paradise Garden is making and living in a paradise. So it's just two ways of looking at the same thing. So why do I keep harping on this word paradise? Well, it's this whole values thing, right? So I'm saying the key to everything is shifting human values. So what values can we put up against this contemporary ultra-materialist Western kind of lifestyle, which is become hugely popular all around the world just in the last generation or so, when we've got media taking it everywhere. So there are people in foreign countries who just love this TV program called Friends. I've never seen it, but I gather it's just like a bunch of yuppies having a really great time in life, and everybody's like, I want to be like that, back to the kid looking at something and defining their values. I want to be like those people. They're having so much fun, and they're dressed so cool and their hair looks so great and they're listening to all this good background music and driving these cool cars. I don't know what else. I've never watched a program called Friends. But so we got to put something up against that. And so that's why I use the word paradise. So we need a powerful counter force. We need to envision what we're doing as being so much better than what's out there. As I said in an early essay I wrote called Paradise Gardening, at the end of it I said the enemy is a paper tiger because it can't deliver the goods. I mean, our country we've destroyed most of the hemisphere south of our border because we're so desperate for drugs. That's how good our lifestyle's working out for us. Anyway, so that's one aspect of the experiment. Then I wanted to talk about a little bit of defining what exactly on the ground, because that's all a little bit theoretical. But what am I doing with my hands all day? Right, so I'm making a paradise garden. So paradise garden, and I came up with a sort of concise definition. Well, I have a number of facile definitions, like the garden where everything you need is there for the taking. That would be a definition of a paradise garden. But a little bit more concisely, I call it a botanical garden of useful plants grown ecologically and arranged ornamentally. So botanical garden, that's touching on this idea that the planet wants to become more diverse. So I'm trying to promote the diversity in my area. So that's one thing I do, because, to get into it presently, but we are going to, no matter what, we're still going to have to make a certain amount of money. So what we want to do is have a way to make money which is actually leading us in the direction of needing less money. Our whole goal, you might say, is to not need any money. But it's hopeless for sure in this lifetime, but we can certainly make every effort to minimize how much money we need, like by obviously growing our own food and, producing our own building materials would be two really obvious examples. So that's the botanical garden of useful plants, grown ecologically and arranged ornamentally. So arranged ornamentally is like trying to make a beautiful garden, one that's going to be totally satisfying to me, one that I want to spend all of my time in, which I derive great pleasure and inspiration from being in, and am motivated to be more creative from being in this environment. So that's a beautiful environment, and I derive my inspiration from both English gardens of sort of the 19th century. Some of them, they were very complete. These gardens had kitchen gardens. These Victorian estates were very close to self-sufficient in a lot of ways. They produced everything they needed. And if you told the gardener you wanted strawberries in September, it was up to him to get you strawberries in September, one way or another. Then invented whole little special houses just to grow pineapples in. It's all a little outrageous in a way, but it also was a demonstration of what could be accomplished. So what if that Victorian estate was instead a worker-owned cooperative, but still doing all the same stuff, instead of just allowing this lord to invite over people for the weekend and impress them with all of his classy stuff. Anyway, so that would be the ornamental aspect. And then grown ecologically means trying to naturalize the plants, get them into habitats where they're just going to survive. And all I really have to do is know where they are. So the idea would be the goal would be to become a hunter-gatherer in your own garden. So hunter-gatherers, just to get on down a little aside, that was kind of the last time that we really lived as a functioning part of Gaia. Foragers, we call them nowadays. There aren't very many of them left. They got chased out of everywhere. But they never signed up, you know. They took one look at us and they went in the other direction. Why didn't they fall for our TVs and our Cadillacs and like all this great stuff we've got? And they just wanted to go in the other direction. Something they saw in our eyes, I think. They called us greedy guts. Anyway, so the goal would be my goal, not too many people's, because these people had very, very simple lives. Pretty much everything they owned they could carry with them. That's a goal for life, right? That was a kind of a beatnik thing, I think. Not own anything you can't leave out in the rain, you know. Lots of people take that goal. Don't own more than you can put in 2 suitcases in a 10 minutes notice, whatever. Having less stuff. But the big problem, even if you wanted to try and be a hunter-gatherer, is that there's not enough land relative to the amount of people. So it took quite a bit of land to be a hunter-gatherer. I don't know what the statistics would vary, of course, by habitat, but a lot of acres, if not square miles, that they roamed around. And they weren't really exactly all that nomadic. I mean, they were just going around their territory. And like this month, we're going to camp at this spot where there's a whole lot of this particular food. And we're just going to gorge out on that. And then next month, we're going to go, they were making a kind of a regular round. But of course, the such and such over here isn't that good this year, so maybe we'll just adjust and go here instead. But they knew all where they were going. Good water here, nice campsites, good food. But there just isn't enough land anymore. So my solution to that problem is that we need to up the carrying capacity of the land by packing it with more useful species. So this is what I'm trying to do. And of course, one could always quibble with that, like what right do I have to be useful to who, But human beings are the problem on this planet, and we need to do the best we can until such time as our population declines by about 90%, and we could maybe get back into some kind of balance. But in the meantime, my solution to this problem, or my approach to this problem, I don't know if it's a solution or not, that's the experiment of my life, is to just pack my environment with more and more useful species, which is also a defense against climate change, you might say. So if I have so diversity equals stability. That's like a common theme in ecology. The more diverse an environment is, the more stable it is, because it can absorb different shocks. So if we all of a sudden have a terrific drought, a diverse environment would have a lot of plants that would benefit, or at least not get killed off by drought conditions, versus then all of a sudden you got a whole long period of very rainy weather. Well, a lot of these more dry land adapted things like cactuses might die totally out, but there's a lot of other stuff that would be flourishing. Similar with weather patterns and so on. The more diversity you have, the better chance there is that you're going to have some species that are going to survive whatever these conditions are. Anyway, that would be the argument for increasing the diversity and at the same time. So increasing the diversity just because that's what Gaia appears to want to be doing, but also increasing the diversity because that is a very good strategy for us as human beings to survive whatever kind of changes are coming, and there seem to be changes coming thick and fast to the climate and so on. So that briefly is the Paradise Garden, and in fact, then we're going to go on, I hope, and make a bunch more of these podcasts where I'll go into a whole lot more of this stuff in detail. As I said, my library burned down. I had a whole library set up to buttress my arguments in all these different directions. So now we're just going to work from memory, kind of. But some of the topics we're going to be getting into, I'm very interested in history, the history of everything. Anything I get interested in, right off the bat, I want to know the history of it. So we're going to be looking at the history of this whole, how this whole problem of humans on the earth has evolved. And that's also a study of anthropology, which I'm very much interested in. And other cultures, including surviving forager cultures and what they have to teach us of how to be a good human being. And then all kinds of philosophical issues like eco-ethics. What are really the ethics of being a human? Aesthetics. What is it that we mean by beautiful, particularly in terms of landscape? And the Chinese have a lot to offer in that regard. And then the politics of just, say, anarchy versus, which I once defined myself as an anarchist, but nowadays I would define myself as an autonomist. The idea of overthrowing the state and somehow it's going to turn into this workers' paradise, like in homage to Catalonia. I don't think that's going to happen. So I more promote the idea of autonomy, that we just need to start setting up our own situations, ignoring as much as possible the state. The state keeps wanting to thrust itself under our noses, but in particular if you live in the mountains, which is, generally speaking, a lot of independent-minded people tend to move towards mountains. So there's that, and what's his name? David Graeber's stuff is great. Different anarchist writers I certainly ascribe to. So I'll talk about different of my favorite alternative authors. There'll be a lot about China. As I said, I've been thinking of myself as a Taoist ever since I was old enough to think for myself, probably when I was in high school. And Taoism is the philosophy we need to live properly on this planet, and so we'll go into that a lot. And just Chinese ideas about, well, even just simple stuff like Chinese crops, Chinese medicinal herbs, but also Chinese ideas of landscape design and what they were really trying to accomplish with that. So I'll talk about a lot of all that stuff. And then just different ways that tribal peoples and so on have lived in different parts of the planet, different more you might say permaculture lifestyles that didn't involve plowing everything up once a year like we do, which is incredibly wasteful. And what does this say here? Plant communities, useful plants. So we want to look at wild plants that people harvest for food. all around the planet, and then kind of basic religions ideas like animism, the idea that everything is alive and has a spirit, and Taoism, and then the ancient Greeks, kind of the sort of parallel to the Taoists, would be the Stoics, Epicureans, Cynics, those people who. Uh, so there was a big argument both in ancient China and in ancient Greece at the same time in history, around 200 BC. And the argument was, should people live according to society or according to nature? That's exactly what I've been talking about for the last hour. And in China, it came to a kind of a balance. The Taoists said we should live according to nature. The Confucians said we should live according to society. And they were all about this structures of society and etiquette and so on, ode to all the different levels of society. So with the Taoists, it was all about nature. Well, the same argument in ancient Greece. And there were people who said we should live, Plato, or maybe it was Aristotle, said man is a political animal. We should live according to society. But there was another faction out there, and those were the Stoics and Cynics. And right this moment, I can't remember the distinction between them. And then Epicurus, who said yes, there are gods, but they don't have anything to do with humans. They're just up there. We're down here on our own, and when we die, we die. That's the end of it. So what we should live for is pleasure. So consequently, Epicurus, of course, got tagged as some kind of hedonist, but his idea of pleasure was actually living a very sober life. Like if you are just banqueting and going to orgies and everything all the time, you're going to have a short life and a miserable old age. That's not my idea of pleasure. His idea of pleasure was working in the garden. And once a week they would have a love feast where the only thing you could talk about was philosophy. You couldn't talk about any kind of day-to-day stuff. Christianity stole all kinds of stuff from Epicurus. He was the first major world religion in the West. Anyway, so these are all alternative views, but they all totally lost out. So Stoics, Cynics, Epicurus, those are all negative terms, right? Because history is written by the victors, and the victors were the ones who said man should live according to society. Man is a political animal. It's exactly what we're trying to get away from here. But so there is stuff back in ancient Greece, and I would like to talk to you some about that in one of these future talks. So, and then at some point I'll get around to once we get through all this basic philosophy stuff that I'm trying to, that's so important. If you're going to build something, the thing you want to pay the most attention to is the foundation, right? So if you want to create a life that's going to be a particular single experiment, you want to pay a great deal of attention to what it's built on. You don't want to get halfway through life and say, oh man, I've been on the wrong track all along. That 30 years was just wasted. That was stupid. So you want to be absolutely sure what you're doing, and that's what I'm trying to help you with right here, is to be absolutely sure of the foundation of what we're doing. So we'll talk more about that probably next time. Some of these things I just mentioned, these topics, different areas I've looked at, anthropology and history and philosophy and da-da-da-da-da. And then eventually we'll get around to talking about what I actually did and how I went about it. Everything up here has been done by hand as much as possible. That's part of the... So my idea about money was use as little money as possible. That's always been my principle. And have as little money as possible. If I ask you what you do, like we meet at a party and say, what do you do? You'll tell me what you do to make money, right? Well, that's not where we want to be. Like what you should do is be giving me your address. Oh, well, I live in the mountains on this little piece of land. That's what I do. I live there. Uh, so, yeah. But yeah, then we'll get around to talking about how this actually manifested itself over the past 50 years in terms of what kind of things I've been doing with my hands. Anyway, so I think we're going to wind this up. It's quite long, really. Thanks for hanging in there. Maybe we'll break it in half or something. And I hope to do some more of these. And I don't know where we're going to put it online, but hopefully there'll be some place where you can give me some feedback uh, and encouragement if you would like to hear more of this. A little bit of encouragement would be all to the good. And okay, good night.